That evening I stayed at work longer than usual. My wife called and said she had gone to a friend's cottage for a couple of days. Laura, my mother-in-law, had invited me over for dinner, so I wouldn't sit hungry and lonely in the big apartment. Ever since her husband died 3 years ago, I had always admired Laura, a statuesque woman with beautiful brown eyes. She looked much younger than her 55 years and held herself with a grace that often made her the center of attention at family gatherings. I often admired her when she wasn't around for dinner. That evening as we talked, she shared more about her life than she ever had before. We discussed her work, where she spoke passionately about her efforts to mentor young colleagues and the satisfaction she found in solving difficult problems. She also talked about her grandchildren, how one of them excels at soccer and the other has just started piano lessons and loves to give small concerts for her. Despite these joys, her voice grew softer as she spoke of her lingering sense of loneliness in the empty apartment she now called home, a place that had once buzzed with family life, but now seemed too quiet. As we drank wine, she talked about the loss of her husband and how she had to fill the void. There was a strange tension in the air. Maybe it was the fact that my wife had become cold to me lately. I couldn't help but notice the vulnerability in Laura's voice, the subtle tremor when she spoke of her loneliness. By the time I got ready to leave, it was getting dark outside. Laura had insisted I stay, saying it was not a good idea to drive after drinking wine. She made a bed for me in the guest room. During the night, I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. I ran into Laura in the dimly lit hallway. She too was awake, wearing a light robe that made her look even more ethereal in the moonlight streaming through the window. She seemed especially beautiful, her brown eyes reflecting a soft glow. We stood so close that I could feel the warmth of her body. She raised her eyes to me, and I saw something in them that took my breath away. It was a mixture of longing and uncertainty, like she was torn between holding back and surrendering. My heart raced, and a whirlwind of emotions swept over me, confusion, guilt, and an overwhelming attraction to her. In that fleeting moment, all the barriers we'd erected seemed to crumble, leaving behind only raw, unspoken feelings that neither of us could ignore. Her gaze captured me, and I felt both horror and delight at the depth of connection reflected in her eyes. I don't know how it happened, but a moment later I was already embracing her. The world around us seemed to disappear when we did that, you know what I mean. In the morning I woke up in a room. It was raining outside the window, its soft pounding against the glass adding to the surrealness of the night before. Laura wasn't there. Voices came from the kitchen, and I realized her sister had come in. I lay still, listening intently. Her sister's voice came into the room, casual yet curious. At one point she even peeked into the bedroom, and her footsteps faltered for a moment before she withdrew. The two women had a long conversation in the kitchen, their voices lowered to a whisper. When her sister left, Laura returned to the bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed, her expression pensive. She was silent for a long time, looking at her hands as if searching for the right words. Finally she turned to me and said quietly, "We need to talk." I knew she was right. What happened that night had changed everything. We talked and decided that what happened should remain our secret. Neither of us wanted to hurt my wife or upset the delicate balance in our family. But even as we made the pact, I saw in her eyes the same desire I had seen the night before. It lurked between us, unspoken but undeniable. A week later, when she called me and asked if I could come over, I couldn't refuse. I told myself it was a mistake, but my actions gave me away. Months passed and my life became a tangle of lies and secret meetings. I loved my wife, or at least I convinced myself I did. But I couldn't resist the pull I felt for Laura. Every time I went to see her, we spent hours together, rediscovering parts of ourselves that had long gone unclaimed. She opened up to me in revelations that seemed raw and intimate. I saw in her not just a mother-in-law, but a beautiful, passionate woman who had her own needs and dreams. Sometimes we would just talk while lying in her bed and share stories that were both painful and poignant. She would tell me about her youth, how she met my father-in-law, and how their life together had affected her. I listened, fascinated by the depth of her experiences, and thought about how strange life is. It brings people together in the most unexpected ways. One day my wife asked me why I was so often late at work. Her tone was casual, but her eyes told a different story. She suspected something. I made up a story about a new project, adding details to make it believable, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. That night was the first time I really thought about what I was doing. I lay sleepless, staring at the ceiling, pondering the choices I had made and the consequences they could lead to. The last time I saw Laura was a week ago. She had called me, but this time was different. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of finality in her words. When I arrived, she seemed distant, her usual warmth replaced by a quiet determination. She said she couldn't go on like this, that she didn't want to destroy her daughter's family. Her words burned me like a cold wind, but I knew she was right. Now every time we gather around the family table, my wife suspects nothing. But sometimes I catch Laura's long, thoughtful gaze. In those moments I'm reminded of all we've shared, and the weight of our secrecy becomes even heavier. Sometimes the wrong things are the most unforgettable.